The late autumn wind rattled the last yellow leaves against the window of Ethan Caldwell's small rented duplex in Dayton, Ohio. Inside, a half-finished cup of cold coffee sat next to a stack of overdue bills. Ethan rubbed his temples, staring at the letter from the county court that had arrived that morning. State of Ohio versus Ethan Caldwell. Misdemeanor criminal damage to property. He hadn't meant to break his neighbor's fence. The old boards had been rotting for years. He just backed his truck up too far while trying to move an old grill. But his neighbor, Mr. Hardwick, treated it like a personal attack and filed charges after weeks of simmering tension. Ethan's sister, Mary Ann, had come over the moment he called. She paced the living room now, arms crossed and brow furrowed. "You need a lawyer," she said. "Seriously, Ethan, you can't mess around with this." Ethan shrugged, trying to look confident, even though inside he felt like his stomach was made of cold clay. "It's a basic case. A fence broke. I can explain it myself. Why should I pay a lawyer $1,000 I don't have?" Mary Ann stopped pacing. "Because this isn't small claims court. This is criminal. Ethan, people hire lawyers for a reason." Ethan sighed. He knew she was right, but the thought of more debt weighed heavier than reason. "I'll be fine," he muttered. "I'm not stupid. I know what happened. I'll just tell the truth." She gave him a long, defeated stare, the kind older sisters develop after years of watching their younger siblings make avoidable mistakes. She finally sat down on the couch, the old cushions groaning beneath her. "I just don't want you to lose everything over something dumb," she said softly. As he looked at her, Ethan remembered countless Thanksgivings, backyard barbecues, and family camping trips with her always watching out for him. But right then his pride was louder than his memories. "I've got this," he insisted. But as he folded the court letter and slid it into a drawer, a knot tightened in his chest, one he refused to acknowledge. The Montgomery County Courthouse rose like a tan stone fortress against the pale morning sky. Ethan arrived early, holding only a thin folder with his printed photos of the fence and a handwritten statement. Inside the courtroom, everything felt bigger than he expected. The vaulted ceiling, the glossy wood paneling, the somber atmosphere. People whispered, shuffled papers, and cast tense glances at one another. A judge's bench elevated above the whole room emphasized the power dynamic he had underestimated. Ethan took a seat at the defendant's table. He noticed the prosecutor, a woman in her early 30s with a neat blazer and a stack of organized binders, reviewing notes with the precision of someone who lived for structure. Judge Raymond Huntsley, gray-haired and stern, entered. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Everyone rose. When the case was called, Ethan cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, I'll be, representing myself." Judge Huntsley peered over his glasses. "Mr. Caldwell, are you certain? The court strongly advises defendants to seek counsel." "I'm sure," Ethan said, though his voice trembled slightly. The prosecutor stepped forward. "The state is ready, Your Honor." Ethan's folder suddenly felt pathetically thin. When the prosecutor presented her case, she spoke with smooth clarity. The police report, the history of disputes with a neighbor, the alleged threat Ethan made during an argument weeks before. "What?" Ethan whispered. He hadn't threatened Hardwick. He'd said in frustration, "This whole fence thing is ridiculous," and Hardwick twisted it into a threat. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "you'll have time to respond." But when it was his turn, his attempt at presenting a structured defense devolved into rambling explanations, interruptions, and missed legal objections he didn't even know he could make. At one point, the judge stopped him. "Mr. Caldwell, please focus your remarks on the incident in question." He flushed red. "I am." But he wasn't. Not really. By lunch break, Ethan sat alone on a wooden bench in the courthouse hallway, head in hands, as families and attorneys passed around him. A group of public defenders chatted casually near the vending machines. They seemed so in control, so knowledgeable, so unlike him. He finally admitted to himself what he avoided all morning. He was in over his head. That evening, Mary Ann pulled into Ethan's driveway after work. The headlights illuminated him sitting on the porch steps, elbows on his knees. She recognized that posture. It reminded her of when they were kids, when something had gone wrong, and he didn't know how to fix it. "So," she asked gently, sitting beside him. "It went bad," Ethan muttered. He explained everything. The judge's warnings, the prosecutor's arguments, the twisted threat, and his inability to speak clearly in the courtroom's intimidating environment. Marianne listened, her expression softening with each sentence. When he finished, she let out a long sigh. "Ethan, it's okay. You're not the first person who thought self-representation was easy. I thought being honest was enough." "That's not how the legal system works here," she said. "You need someone who speaks the system's language." Inside, the house smelled faintly of last night's reheated pizza. The TV was muted on a news channel, its subtitles scrolling silently. Ethan looked around to clutter, mail, tools, half-folded laundry, the signs of a life running on exhaustion. "Marianne," he said quietly, "what if I mess this up so bad I end up a criminal record?" She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you get help before it gets worse." Their conversation drifted into memories of their dad, who always lectured them about responsibility during Sunday dinners. He used to say, "You don't fix a leaky roof by ignoring rain." It hit Ethan now in a way it hadn't then. Looking at his sister, he saw not someone nagging him, but someone who refused to let him drown himself. "Okay," he whispered. I think I need a lawyer." The next morning, Ethan met with Daniel Kearns, a public defender in his early 40s with a calm demeanor and the kind of weariness that comes from handling too many cases and too little sleep. Daniel's office was cramped, filled with old case files and a coffee maker that looked older than Ethan. A tiny American flag stood on the desk, probably leftover from last year's 4th of July. "So you try to go pro-SE," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah," Ethan groaned. "Huge mistake." Daniel cracked a sympathetic half-smile. "Happens more often than you'd think. Courtrooms are a different world. People think they can talk their way through it like a conversation, but it's a technical arena." They spent over an hour going through the case. Daniel took notes rapidly, occasionally muttering legal jargon under his breath. When Ethan described Hardwick's exaggerations, Daniel's expression sharpened. "You didn't threaten him," Daniel repeated. "We can challenge that. And the fence was clearly deteriorating long before your truck touched it." Ethan hesitated. "So you think I have a chance?" "A chance?" Daniel said. "Definitely. But you need to follow my lead. You want to talk a lot, but don't. Let me handle the courtroom." This was hard for Ethan. He wasn't used to surrendering control. He'd been handling life alone since their father passed 5 years earlier. He fixed his own truck, negotiated with his landlord, and took any overtime he could get hauling freight for local stores. But this battle wasn't mechanical or practical. It was legal, and he finally had someone trained for it. Before Ethan left the office, Daniel gave him one last piece of advice. "Look, representing yourself doesn't mean you're stupid," he said. "It just means you didn't know what you didn't know. Now you do." The words lifted some of the weight from Ethan's chest. Back in court a week later, the difference was night and day. Daniel stood beside Ethan as the case resumed. The prosecutor seemed slightly annoyed that her near-certain win was now up against an experienced defender. Daniel opened cleanly. "The state has mischaracterized this incident. This is not a case of intentional criminal damage. This is a neighbor dispute gone too far." His voice was smooth, confident, sharp in all the places Ethan had been dull. When Mr. Hardwick took the stand, Daniel dissected his claims with professional precision. "You testified," Daniel said, pacing slowly, that Mr. Caldwell said, quote, "You'll regret this, correct?" Hardwick nodded stiffly. "And this was after weeks of disagreements about the fence?" "Yes." "Isn't it true," Daniel continued, "that the fence had been collapsing for months, and that multiple neighbors had complained about the hazard it posed?" Hardwick's jaw tightened. It wasn't that bad." Daniel produced photos. "These were taken 2 months before the incident. Do these look not that bad?" Hardwick sputtered. The judge raised an eyebrow. Ethan sat there stunned. So this is what real representation looks like, he thought. Later, when Ethan was called to testify, Daniel coached him with subtle nods. He kept his answers brief, factual, He didn't wander into personal grudges or emotional tangents. When the prosecutor tried to paint him as reckless, Daniel objected instantly, something Ethan had been completely unable to do himself. By the end, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. Where Ethan once felt small, exposed, and overwhelmed, he now felt shielded by someone who understood the battlefield. Judge Hunsley returned after a short recess. The courtroom hushed in anticipation. In the matter of State of Ohio versus Ethan Caldwell, the judge began. The court finds insufficient evidence that the defendant acted with criminal intent. Ethan exhaled sharply. His shoulders slumped, relief flooding him. However, the judge continued, the defendant is responsible for the repair costs of the damaged portion of the fence. This shall be handled through civil channels. That Ethan could live with. As court adjourned, Daniel packed his files. You did well up there, he said. You did better, Ethan replied, shaking his hand. Thank you. Walking outside, the crisp air hit his face. Marianne was waiting by the courthouse steps, hands clasped nervously. The moment she saw his expression, she rushed forward. Oh, thank God, she breathed, hugging him tightly. They walked to her car, passing families heading to lunch, attorneys laughing with colleagues, people juggling the everyday burdens of American life. Across the street, a food truck served chili dogs, filling the air with the warm scent of onions and mustard. It reminded Ethan of high school football games and county fairs, moments where problems felt small and manageable. Sitting on a bench, Ethan finally admitted everything to his sister. I thought handling things alone made me strong, he said, but it just made me blind. Marianne smiled gently. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. He nodded, looking up at the courthouse. I learned something today, he said quietly. The system isn't built for people going alone. Lawyers aren't just for big criminals. They're for regular people who could lose a lot over one mistake. Marianne nudged him playfully. So, no more representing yourself. He chuckled. Never again. As the afternoon sun warmed their faces, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. Not because everything was perfect, he still had bills, fence repairs, and work shifts ahead, but because he realized he didn't have to face life alone. Some battles require expertise. Some burdens require support. And some lessons, especially in America's complicated legal world, must be learned the hard way. Ethan had learned his, and he would never forget it.